The mansion stood like a monument to excess, a glittering palace carved from wealth and pride. Every corner of the grand hall spoke of power. The crystal chandeliers hung like constellations suspended in gold, scattering light over marble floors polished to the brilliance of mirrors. The air was heavy with the faint fragrance of imported lilies placed in tall vases, their white petals immaculate, though their scent could not mask the faint tension that threaded invisibly through the house. Servants moved silently across the rooms, their steps calculated, their eyes lowered, each trained in the unspoken art of pretending not to see or hear too much. The grandeur dazzled, yet beneath the shine lingered a heaviness, as though the walls themselves kept secrets, waiting for the right moment to whisper them out. Elena sat quietly on the edge of a velvet sofa, her delicate hands resting on the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. Her face glowed faintly from the chandelier's light, but behind her eyes was a weariness that luxury could not conceal. She wore a soft silk gown, pale and simple, a stark contrast to the glittering decor around her. Despite her fragility, there was a kind of grace in the way she held herself, chin slightly lifted, back straight, as if silently reminding herself that she belonged here, even if others tried to erase her presence. She waited for her husband, counting the passing minutes with the steady tick of a gilded clock. Every sound seemed to amplify in the silence. The clink of silver trays in the kitchen, the swish of skirts from passing maids, the hollow echo of her own heartbeat. The silence broke with the sudden rhythm of heels on marble. Selina entered without hesitation, as though the mansion belonged to her. She was dressed in scarlet, a gown that seemed chosen not for elegance but for dominance, her hair falling in waves that caught the chandelier's light. She didn't look at the servants, she didn't need to, for they scurried to make way. Her eyes, sharp and cold, fixed immediately on Elena, and a smirk curved her lips. There was no kindness in her presence, only a deliberate reminder of power and possession. Elena did not rise, nor did she avert her gaze. Instead, she pressed her hand protectively against her stomach, silent but unyielding. The air thickened between them, a storm gathering quietly in the opulence of the room, foreshadowing a conflict that would soon shatter the fragile mask of grandeur. Elena had not been born into this world of chandeliers and marble. Her roots were humbler, her memories filled with small courtyards, warm kitchens, and laughter that was not guarded by servants. She had grown up in a modest home, where her father worked tirelessly, and her mother stitched clothes to keep the family afloat. It was in that environment that Elena learned patience, resilience, and the quiet dignity of enduring hardship without bitterness. When she married Adrian Blackwood, the millionaire whose wealth and name commanded attention everywhere, she believed she had been blessed with a life of comfort and love. At first, it seemed true. Lavish gifts, elegant dinners, and promises of devotion whispered into her ears. Yet, over time, the shine of wealth dulled, and in its place came whispers of betrayal, of a mistress who carried herself with the confidence of someone who thought she owned more than the mansion. Still, Elena remained. She endured Adrian's neglect and Selina's constant presence, not because she was weak but because she carried within her a strength that neither of them understood. It was not the strength of dominance or arrogance but of sacrifice. She held her head high through the humiliations, finding her anchor in the new life growing inside her. Her pregnancy had changed everything, her priorities, her courage, her determination. With every movement of the child within her, she felt less like a victim and more like a guardian, willing to absorb pain if it meant protecting the little heartbeat she carried. That night, as she sat in the mansion's grand hall, her expression calm though her heart was restless, Elena embodied a quiet resilience. Fragile in appearance, yes. Her pale skin and delicate frame gave her the look of porcelain, but beneath it was steel, forged in years of hardship and silence. Her love for her unborn child filled the emptiness her husband had left. She whispered small prayers no one could hear, prayers that her child would never know the pain of betrayal she lived with daily. It was this strength, invisible yet unshakable, that made her presence more powerful than Selina's sharp arrogance or Adrian's cold pride. The silence of the mansion cracked open when Selina made her entrance, as though the very air bent to accommodate her presence. She walked with the confidence of someone who had no fear of judgment, her heels striking the marble in a rhythm that announced both power and provocation. Her gown, a deep shade of crimson, shimmered with every step, clinging to her like fire in motion. Jewels glittered at her ears and throat, carefully chosen to catch the chandelier's glow, turning her into a spectacle meant to dominate the room. She carried herself not as a guest but as a woman who believed she was the true mistress of the house, her arrogance painted on every curve of her smile. Selina's eyes landed on Elena, and a sneer tugged at her lips. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though savoring the moment of superiority. "Still waiting for him?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain, not bothering to mask the venom. She circled the sofa where Elena sat, like a predator circling prey, her perfume lingering in the air as an uninvited intrusion. Her words cut like knives, designed to remind Elena of her position in Adrian's life. Not a partner, but an obstacle in Selina's path. Elena remained seated, her hand resting protectively over her stomach, her face composed though her heart hammered within. She did not rise to meet the arrogance, nor did she flinch at the insults. Her silence was deliberate, her strength found not in retaliation but in calm resistance. Yet Selina mistook it for weakness, mistook her quietness for surrender. She leaned closer, her voice low but sharp. "You don't belong in his world. You're nothing but a faded shadow clinging to a title that should be mine." The tension in the room thickened, heavy and suffocating. Servants lingered at the edges, pretending to busy themselves, though their ears strained toward the confrontation. The grand chandeliers glittered above, mocking in their brilliance as if they too relished the spectacle. Elena's stillness only fueled Selina's rage, her arrogance turning into impatience. Somewhere in that silence lay the promise of a storm, and though Selina smirked with satisfaction, she could not see that it was Elena's quiet endurance that made her truly unbreakable. Selina's smirk hardened into something darker as the silence between them stretched too long. Elena's refusal to respond, her refusal to cower, stirred something violent in Selina's chest. She had expected tears, begging, or at the very least a crack in the facade of calm that Elena wore like a second skin. Instead, Elena sat there, her hand upon her stomach, her eyes steady and unflinching, as though Selina's presence was nothing more than a passing storm. That stillness enraged her, for arrogance feeds on reaction, and when denied it, it claws for more brutal forms of power. Her gaze swept the room and fell upon a steel rod lying near the fireplace, an object servants had placed there earlier to adjust the heavy iron grates. In an instant, her hand wrapped around it, the metal gleaming under the chandelier's glow. The sound of it scraping against the marble as she lifted it made the servants freeze in their steps, their faces draining of color. Selina did not hesitate. Her voice rose, shrill and venomous. "You think you're better than me because you wear his name? Because you carry his child? Let me remind you, you mean nothing here." With a sudden motion, she swung the rod downward, striking the arm of the sofa just inches from Elena's side, the impact echoing like a thunderclap through the hall. Elena flinched but did not scream. Her eyes closed for a breath, her hand tightening over her stomach as though shielding her unborn child from the violence in the air. That calm only stoked Selina's fury further. The second strike was not aimed at furniture. It came down toward Elena's shoulder, grazing her arm with a sharp pain that made her gasp but still not cry out. The servants exchanged glances, their instinct to intervene clashing with their fear of Adrian's wrath. No one moved. The mansion, with all its grandeur, seemed to shrink into a cage where cruelty reigned unchecked. Selina shouted insults between each blow, her words cutting as deeply as the rod itself. Pathetic, unworthy, a weak little doll pretending to be a wife. Elena stumbled as the rod caught her side, her knees giving way as she slid onto the cold marble floor. She pressed her cheek against it, the chill a stark contrast to the burning ache in her body. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear but from the sharp sting of betrayal, that she could be so unprotected in a house meant to be her sanctuary. She whispered softly to herself, almost inaudibly, "For you, my child, I will endure this." Selina's chest heaved, her face flushed with triumph as she raised the rod once more. She had proven her dominance, and the servant's silence was her crown. Yet in Elena's eyes, even clouded by pain, there was something Selina could not erase: resilience. It was quiet, but it was there, a promise that this moment would not define her, even as the rod crashed once more against the floor beside her trembling body. Selina's rage did not end with the blows. Her breaths came fast, her chest rising and falling with the satisfaction of cruelty. She dropped the steel rod onto the floor with a loud clang, the echo reverberating through the hall like a victory drum. Without sparing a glance at the servants, she grabbed Elena's arm and yanked her up with a force that ignored her condition. Elena gasped, clutching her belly with one hand, trying desperately to steady herself, but Selina's grip was merciless. The doors of the mansion groaned as Selina shoved them open, dragging Elena across the threshold into the biting night. The polished marble gave way to rough stone steps, and Elena stumbled barefoot onto the cold surface, her skin scraping as she fell to her knees. The night air was sharp, carrying the smell of rain-soaked earth. Dark clouds had gathered above, and as Selina's fury spilled out into the open, the heavens seemed to join her, releasing heavy drops that spattered against Elena's face and gown. "Stay where you belong," Selina spat, her voice cutting through the storm. She gave Elena one last shove, sending her sprawling onto the gravel driveway. The sharp stones dug into her palms as she tried to push herself upright. Her silk gown clung to her body, now soaked and muddied, the fabric no longer a symbol of wealth but of vulnerability. She shivered violently, the cold piercing her skin, but her arms instinctively folded around her stomach, protecting the fragile life inside. Behind her, the massive doors slammed shut with a thunderous crash, locking her out of the warmth, the safety, the very home she had once thought hers. Selina's silhouette lingered for a moment in the window above, her smirk visible even through the rain before the curtains were drawn tight. The driveway stretched before Elena like an endless path of shame. The mansion loomed behind her, its golden lights glowing mockingly through the storm, as though the wealth inside had no place for her. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating her fragile form kneeling in the rain. The servants, though watching secretly from behind curtains, dared not come to her aid. Alone, battered, and trembling, Elena closed her eyes and whispered a single vow: she would not let this night break her. Adrian Blackwood had built his empire on charm, cunning, and ruthlessness. To the world outside, he was the perfect image of success, a self-made millionaire whose name commanded respect in business circles, a man whose lavish parties filled society pages, and whose presence alone could silence a crowded room. But beneath the polished exterior, Adrian's life was a careful balance of indulgence and control, a double life that fed both his ego and his insatiable hunger for power. He had met Elena years earlier, when he was still building his empire. She was quiet, graceful, and carried an innocence that disarmed him in a way wealth and ambition never could. At first, he loved the purity she brought into his chaotic world. He saw her as a jewel that elevated his image, an ideal wife who would stand beside him at events, soft-spoken, elegant, a contrast to his commanding personality. But as time passed and the thrill of conquest dulled, Adrian's eyes began to wander. His arrogance demanded more than loyalty, it demanded adoration, the kind that came not from love but from submission. That was where Selina entered. She was bold, fiery, and unafraid to challenge him. Where Elena was gentle, Selina was fierce. Where Elena endured, Selina provoked. Adrian found himself intoxicated by her defiance, her willingness to bask in his wealth while also taunting him with the risk of losing her. She did not quietly compliment his power like Elena did. She mirrored it, reflected it, and at times even rivaled it. For a man like Adrian, used to controlling everything, that volatility was addictive. He convinced himself he could keep both women without consequence. To society, Elena remained the perfect wife, her pregnancy only strengthening his public image as a man with a family legacy to continue. To his darker desires, Selina was the spark, the mistress who thrilled him, who whispered flattery and poison in equal measure. The mansion became a stage where his arrogance played out, Elena in one wing, dignified and patient, Selina in another, fiery and demanding. He believed himself untouchable, a king with two queens, each serving a different purpose. But Adrian ignored the fractures forming beneath the surface. He did not see how Elena's quiet endurance was hardening into something stronger than submission. He did not see how Selina's arrogance was no longer tempered by the need to please him, but was turning into open cruelty. In his pride, He assumed they would always remain in their roles. Elena, the dutiful wife, silent and accepting. Selina, the mistress who entertained his desires. He underestimated them both. The night he left for his business trip, he had no idea the fragile balance would shatter in his absence. He did not imagine that Selina, emboldened by his neglect, would unleash her fury on Elena. Nor could he foresee that Elena, though bruised and abandoned, would find within herself the strength to rise above both his betrayal and Selina's violence. In thinking himself a master of two worlds, Adrian had set the stage for his own reckoning. The rain poured relentlessly, each drop striking Elena like tiny shards of glass against her already aching body. She leaned heavily against the cold iron gates of the mansion, her breath uneven, her hair plastered to her face. The silk gown clung to her skin, now more burden than comfort, weighing her down with water and mud. Her body trembled from exhaustion, yet her hands never strayed from her stomach. Each protective touch was an unspoken promise to the child within her, that no matter what storms came, she would not falter. The night around her was eerily silent, broken only by the distant roll of thunder and the soft patter of rain against stone. Lightning illuminated the driveway for moments at a time, casting her fragile figure in fleeting brilliance, like a wounded angel thrown from her own sanctuary. She closed her eyes and memories surged. The day she had married Adrian, when he had looked at her with warmth and pride, the laughter of her younger days, untainted by betrayal, the dreams she once carried of building a family in a home filled with love rather than tension. Each memory struck her with a painful contrast to the reality she now lived. Her lips moved in a whisper, words carried only to the child beneath her heart. "I must survive for you," she breathed, her voice trembling yet steady with conviction. "If the world rejects me, if your father abandons me, I will still stand. For you, I will endure." She drew strength from that vow, her body weak but her spirit refusing to collapse. The mansion behind her, with all its golden lights and endless wealth, had cast her out, but it had not broken her. For the first time, Elena felt a fire kindle within her chest, a quiet, unyielding power born not from privilege but from suffering. Though drenched, shivering, and alone in the storm, she carried a resilience that wealth could never buy. And in that moment, the night itself seemed to pause, as though even the rain recognized that beneath her fragile frame was the steel of a mother who would not be defeated. The roar of an engine broke through the storm, its deep growl echoing against the mansion walls. Headlights cut through sheets of rain, sweeping over Elena's trembling figure as a sleek black car rolled up the driveway. The sound alone was enough to scatter the last shreds of silence, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The car stopped sharply, tires splashing through puddles, and the door swung open with deliberate force. Adrian Blackwood stepped out, his figure towering against the glow of the headlights. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding even in the chaos of the storm. His eyes, sharp and restless from a long journey, immediately caught sight of Elena crumpled near the gates. At first, disbelief froze him, his wife, drenched, bruised and barely standing, her arms curled around her stomach like a shield. The sight was so at odds with the pristine image he kept of his world that for a moment, he thought it a nightmare conjured by exhaustion. "Elena!" His voice thundered over the rain as he rushed forward, his polished shoes splashing through the water. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands hovering helplessly before finally settling on her shoulders. Her skin was cold, her gown torn, and the faint marks of violence spoke of something far darker than an accident. His jaw clenched, anger boiling beneath his composure as he demanded, "What happened? Who did this to you?" Elena looked up at him, her eyes heavy with pain but not submission. She did not answer immediately. Her silence was more powerful than any words. The servants, who had been watching secretly from the shadows, exchanged nervous glances. Their loyalty to Adrian warred with their fear of Selina, but the truth could no longer be hidden. A murmur passed among them, and one brave maid whispered, "It was her. Miss Selina." Adrian's expression darkened, his features carved with fury. The storm around him seemed to echo his rage, thunder splitting the sky as if in response. He pulled his coat from his shoulders and wrapped it around Elena, shielding her fragile body from the rain. For the first time in years, his touch was not one of control or ownership but of urgency, of protection. He lifted her carefully, as though afraid she might shatter, his eyes never leaving the mansion's golden-lit windows. Inside, laughter floated faintly from the drawing-room, Selina's silhouette visible against the curtains. Adrian's breath came sharp, his fury contained only by the need to secure his wife's safety first. As he carried Elena across the threshold, his mind was no longer clouded by arrogance. A reckoning awaited within those walls, and he was ready to unleash it. Adrian's steps thundered through the hallway as he carried Elena inside, the storm raging behind him like a mirror of his own fury. Servants scrambled out of the way, their faces pale, their silence trembling on the edge of confession. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed ahead, every muscle in his body straining to contain the explosion that threatened to break free. He lowered Elena gently onto a chaise near the grand staircase, his coat still wrapped tightly around her, and only when he was certain she was safe did he rise to his full height. Without a word, he turned and strode toward the drawing-room, his fury igniting each step. Selina was waiting there, lounging like a queen in stolen territory. A half-finished glass of wine dangled from her manicured fingers, her gown glowing like flame in the soft light of the chandeliers. She did not rise when Adrian entered. Instead, she offered a languid smile, as though nothing at all had transpired. "You're back earlier than I expected," she said coolly, swirling the wine in her glass. "Did your little porcelain doll complain already?" "She's always been dramatic." Adrian's eyes narrowed, and before she could lift the glass to her lips, he struck it from her hand. It crashed against the marble floor, the red liquid spilling like blood across the tiles. Selina froze for a moment, her smirk faltering as she registered the fury burning in his eyes. "Dramatic." His voice was low, dangerous. "She's bleeding, Selina. Shivering in the rain, thrown out like an animal. And you dare sit here, drinking, as if nothing happened." Selina's mask slipped, but only for a second. She straightened her posture, her voice rising with defiance. "She provoked me. She looks at me with that pathetic silence, as though she's better than me. She carries herself like she owns this house, when it's me you love, me you want. Why should she be here at all? She's weak, Adrian, and I." "Enough." The word cracked through the room like a whip. Adrian's fury filled the air, suffocating, undeniable. His hands trembled at his sides, not with hesitation but with the sheer force of the rage coursing through him. "You dare touch her? My wife, my child. Do you think your arrogance gives you that right?" For the first time, Selina's confidence faltered. She opened her mouth, ready to spin another lie, but the weight of Adrian's fury silenced her. The room itself seemed to shrink under the pressure of his wrath. The storm outside battered the windows, but it was nothing compared to the storm within. Selina's reign of cruelty had met its end, and she knew, perhaps for the first time, that Adrian Blackwood was not a man to be trifled with when his pride and bloodline were threatened. Selina's mask of arrogance slipped, but only slightly. Her chest rose and fell quickly as she stepped toward Adrian, her voice shifting from defiance to pleading in the space of a heartbeat. "Adrian," she said, softer now, her hands reaching for his arms, "you know why I did it. She doesn't love you the way I do. She doesn't understand you. I am the one who stands by you, the one who feeds your fire, the one who dares to match you. She's just weak. A burden, especially now, waddling around with a child that will tie you down. I struck her because she mocked me with her silence. But everything I've done, everything, was for us." Adrian's eyes flashed, his jaw tightening. He pulled his arm free from her grasp, as though her touch itself burned him. For a long moment, he said nothing. His gaze drifted past her, toward the hall where Elena lay wrapped in his coat, her fragile body trembling with both cold and pain. The contrast between the two women hit him with crushing force. Selina, fiery and desperate, willing to destroy anyone to prove her place, and Elena, quiet and unyielding, carrying both his child and a strength he had long mistaken for weakness. Selina stepped closer, her tone rising again, urgency cracking through her smooth facade. "Don't you see? I'm the one who truly loves you. She doesn't fight for you, Adrian. She tolerates you. I give you passion, fire. She gives you nothing but silence. Choose me. Send her away, let her rot in her little world. With me, you'll never be bored, never be ordinary. Her words rang hollow against the storm raging outside. Adrian turned slowly to face her, his expression cold, carved in stone. Passion, he said, his voice low but steady. You call cruelty passion? You call breaking a woman carrying my child love? You confuse obsession with devotion, Selina. And you've mistaken my indulgence for permanence. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Selina's eyes widened as the weight of his words sank in. You can't mean that. You can't choose her over me. She's nothing without you. Adrian took a step toward her, his presence towering, his fury no longer explosive but razor-sharp. And what am I with you? A man so blinded by arrogance that he allowed a viper into his home? She may be quiet, but her silence is stronger than your noise will ever be. She endures. She carries my legacy. And you, his voice hardened, you have dared to lay hands on what is mine, to endanger the only innocent in this house. Behind him, Elena shifted faintly on the chaise, her hand pressing to her stomach as she listened, her tears flowing silently. Adrian's eyes lingered on her for a moment, and something inside him broke. The realization that in all his wealth and pride, he had been blind to the true strength in his life. The choice was no longer a question. He turned back to Selina, his voice final, cutting like a blade. You've already written your fate tonight. And it does not include me. Selina's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, she felt the ground beneath her slipping, the certainty of her place crumbling into nothingness. Selina's face twisted with disbelief, her painted lips trembling as if searching for words that could rewind what had just been spoken. But Adrian did not allow her the chance. His arm extended toward the door, his voice cold, steady, and unshakable. Leave. The single word cut sharper than any scream. Selina blinked, stunned, her arrogance faltering for the first time. Adrian, you can't mean this. After everything I've given you? After everything we've shared? Her voice cracked, the fire in her tone now edged with desperation. She reached for him again, but he stepped back, his eyes never softening. Get out. The authority in his tone was absolute. The same power that had built his empire now turned against the woman who thought she ruled him. Selina's chest heaved, her eyes flashing with both rage and humiliation. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice sharp as broken glass. You'll crawl back to me when she drains you with her weakness. You think she's strong, but she'll break you, Adrian. And when she does, remember that I warned you. Her heels clattered against the marble as she stormed across the room, snatching her coat with jerking hands. The servants shrank back, their relief poorly hidden behind lowered gazes. The grand doors slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the mansion like a final curse. The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian stood rooted in place, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. For a moment, his anger seemed to collapse inward, leaving only the weight of what he had just done. Slowly, he turned back toward the staircase. Elena was still there, lying faintly against the chaise. Her face was pale, her gown torn and damp, her eyes half-lidded from exhaustion. Adrian's footsteps softened as he approached, and then, in an act uncharacteristic for a man so proud, he lowered himself to his knees beside her. His hand reached for hers, hesitant, trembling, as though unsure if he had the right to touch her after all the neglect he had shown. Elena! His voice cracked on her name, raw with something close to regret. For the first time in years, he looked up at her not as his possession, not as a trophy, but as the woman who bore the weight of his name, his child, and his betrayals. And in her silence, he saw a strength that both shamed him and broke him. Elena stirred slightly as Adrian's hand brushed against hers, her eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze met his, steady despite the exhaustion clouding her features. For a long moment, she said nothing, and that silence was louder than any accusation. Adrian lowered his head, his pride stripped bare in the face of her quiet dignity. He had roared at boardrooms, commanded armies of employees, and broken rivals with the force of his will, but in this moment he felt smaller than he ever had in his life. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm, every word deliberate. "Do not think I am here because I cannot leave. I stay because of this child. And if you ever allow her cruelty, or your neglect, to touch me again, I will walk away, with or without your name to protect me." Her hand shifted to her stomach, her touch gentle but resolute. "This life I carry is my strength. I will not let him or her grow up in a world where arrogance destroys love." Adrian's throat tightened. The Elena he had once believed was fragile now stood before him as a woman transformed. Even in her weakened state, bruised and trembling from the night's ordeal, she radiated a power he could neither buy nor control. She did not need to shout, did not need to demand. Her quiet defiance carried more weight than all of Selina's fiery arrogance. He tried to speak, to promise change, but the words caught in his throat. How could he ask forgiveness when he himself doubted he deserved it? Instead, he bowed his head lower, his forehead nearly brushing her hand, a gesture that for him was an admission of defeat. He had thought himself untouchable, but Elena's strength had unraveled him more completely than any rival ever had. Elena did not weep, nor did she soften at his unspoken apology. She simply straightened her posture, even in her exhaustion, her eyes fixed on him with calm resolve. In that moment, she was no longer the fragile wife clinging to dignity in silence. She was the mother of his child, a woman who would raise her head high no matter what storms lay ahead. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwood realized that true power was not found in wealth, control, or passion. It was found in the quiet, unbreakable strength of the woman before him. Selina's car tore down the wet driveway, its headlights carving streaks of light through the storm. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The humiliation clung to her like a second skin, the sting of being cast out, the echo of Adrian's voice commanding her to leave, the image of Elena's quiet triumph. Rage burned hotter with every mile she put between herself and the mansion. In her mind, she replayed the scene again and again, each time twisting it further until her anger felt justified. How dare he choose Elena? How dare that fragile, pitiful woman, beaten, trembling, emerge the victor? Selina had believed herself untouchable, the only woman who truly stirred Adrian's passions, and now she was nothing more than a discarded mistress, cast into the storm like a servant. The thought gnawed at her pride, fueling a hatred that would not rest. She pulled the car abruptly to the side of the road, the engine idling as raindrops hammered against the windshield. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, smeared makeup, wild eyes, but still beautiful, still dangerous. She whispered to herself, her voice low and venomous. "This isn't over. He thinks he can humiliate me? Replace me with her silence? No. I'll remind him what happens when you betray me. I'll remind her that she doesn't deserve to stand beside him." Selina's mind worked quickly, weaving possibilities like threads of a dark web. She could ruin them in court, spread whispers to the press, expose secrets Adrian thought buried. She could tear his empire apart piece by piece, not with fire and fury but with whispers and strategy. Or she could strike where it hurt most, not the man, but the woman and child he had chosen over her. The idea alone lit a dangerous gleam in her eyes. As lightning streaked across the sky, Selina's lips curled into a smile, cold, vengeful, and unwavering. She turned the car back onto the road, the storm swallowing her silhouette. She had been cast out tonight, but her story with Adrian and Elena was far from finished. Revenge, patient and poisonous, had already begun to take root. The mansion had grown still after the storm, its golden lights dimmed to a softer glow, as though the house itself sought to hide the shame of what had occurred within its walls. Elena lay in her chamber, her body sore, her skin marred with bruises, yet her eyes open and unclouded. The heavy curtains swayed gently with the breeze, carrying the faint scent of wet earth, a reminder of the night she had endured. In the quiet, she turned her head toward the window, one hand resting lightly on the curve of her stomach. Her lips moved in a whisper meant only for the child within her. "We survived tonight," she murmured, her voice tender yet unwavering. "You and I, together. And we will survive, whatever else comes." The words were not a promise born of hope alone but of conviction. She had faced humiliation, violence and betrayal, yet here she remained, unbroken. What once tethered her to silence had transformed into a fire of determination, small but steady, burning quietly in her chest. Adrian stood at the threshold, watching her. He had not entered fully, as though uncertain if he had the right. His eyes lingered on her, her fragile frame draped in shadows, her bruises stark against her pale skin, her hand protectively cradling the future they shared. For perhaps the first time in his life, Adrian felt powerless. His empire, his wealth, his authority, all seemed meaningless when weighed against the simple truth that he had nearly lost her. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to vow change, but the words withered before they reached his lips. So he remained silent, the weight of guilt pressing heavily on his shoulders. Elena turned her gaze toward him, not with anger, but with a calm strength that pierced him more deeply than any fury could. Her silence was not surrender, it was judgment, quiet and absolute. The storm outside began to ease, the rain softening into a drizzle, the clouds parting just enough for a pale sliver of moonlight to break through. It spilled across the room, bathing Elena in silver light as though the world itself acknowledged her resilience. She closed her eyes, her hand tightening around her child. Whatever battles lay ahead, with Adrian, with Selina, with the world, she would face them. Not as a victim, but as a mother who had discovered the depth of her own power.